Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. I hope you're all doing all right. Today we're going to talk about what I call prolonged states of liminality. These are mental states that I'm talking about, essentially. I've talked about liminality in another video, I think called Liminality and the Trickster. And in that video I kind of describe how liminal states are important in esoteric practices, or for esoteric reasons. And today I'm going to break it down a little bit more, but relate it more to mental health, culture, politics, things like that, and how liminal states can be prolonged. And in a prolonged liminal state, as opposed to just a transitional liminal state, various things can happen. So let's review. A liminal state is, liminality is a place between places. A shoreline on a beach is a place between the ocean and the land. The horizon is a liminal place between the ground and the sky. When you're moving, you're in a liminal place from one home to another home. Coming of age or puberty or something like that is a liminal phase between childhood and adulthood. All these sorts of things. The betwixt and between, as what was his name? George Hansen would say. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about in this video is, I don't know if it'll be controversial, but it's just a little weird, and it can be a little discomforting or uncomfortable. And a lot of it comes from personal experience. I would say about maybe 30 to 40% of what I'm going to talk about comes from books, and 60 to 70% comes just from personal experience and observation. And I think it's important when talking about things like various states of consciousness to come from personal experience instead of coming from book learning or scholarly learning or academia or things like that. It's best to know these things firsthand. But anyway, I think I'm going to start off by sharing a little bit about what liminal states can be in regard to esoteric practices. So firstly, the most popular or well-known types of liminal states for spiritual practices are for shamans. They impose liminal states upon themselves by doing either taboo things or strange things. Like, if they're a man, then they'll dress up as a woman. If they normally eat food, then they might eat garbage or excrement. If people normally walk on their feet, they'll start walking on their hands. Or if their society is very sophisticated, they may wear the masks of animals and behave like an animal. They'll do like taboo things, like the opposite of what is customary. And this kind of momentarily or temporarily, it's usually a lot longer than a moment, temporarily breaks down the psyche and the so-called persona, the mask that you wear, your personality. And you go from a stable state of your normal persona to a different persona, an opposite of what it normally is. And so you have these two states that you shift in between, and that shift is the liminal state. And in a liminal state, I don't know why, it just seems to be the way it is, a person can have access to normally invisible phenomena. Like, you can commune with spirits, and you can alter things in your own mind and body, and also, if you're very talented, you can actually alter things in the physical environment. Some shamans use liminal states to control the weather. I know it sounds hard to believe, but shamans have been, you've heard of the rain dance. I mean, come on, this isn't news to you. And they use liminal states for miracle healing, what we call miracle healing, the curanderos of Central and South America. And it gives the shaman like access to preternatural powers. And visions and perceptions and things like that. There's another thing that you can do with the liminal state during the hypnagogiac state. Now, hypnagogia is the state between waking and sleeping. And a lot of us don't really pay attention to this state because it generally happens very, very rapidly. You're awake, you lie down at bed, then you just kind of relax until you fall asleep, and you relax your mind in such a way that you don't really notice the hypnagogiac state. If you've ever, around siesta time, sometime between 1 and 3 p.m., you may have been more aware of the hypnagogiac state where you're sort of like nodding off and falling asleep, and you might have like a really vivid dream that lasts a second, or you might even remote view some other place, which has happened to me a bunch of times in a hypnagogiac state where I'm like trying to read a book at 2 p.m. and I just can't do it, and then I just sort of zone out, and I'm not quite awake, and I'm not quite asleep, and it can last minutes sometimes. And I'm like unaware that I didn't try to enter this state. It just sort of happened because, it's siesta time, it's early afternoon, I just had lunch, I'm trying to read, it's just everything wants to put you to sleep. And like I'll like remote view something that's happening 1,000 miles away, or like I'll hear an argument that two people are having like 500 miles away or something, or I'll just, be watching birds flying, and then like I come to and I was like, whoa, I was like in a hypnagogiac state. Now maybe it was just a dream, but some of those experiences can be verified. Of course, we have people like Edgar Cayce who could put himself in a hypnagogiac state very easily, and we know he was remote viewing. It had been proven. He knew like where a person was sitting in a theater, what color sweater they were wearing, what kind of health problems they had in England when he was in like Kansas or something, or Kentucky, and like he and it was verified. He was correct, and they had verified it plenty of times that he was actually remote viewing in his hypnagogiac state. So other than remote viewing, shamanic powers, going along with the shamanic powers, a guy who goes by the name of Neville Goddard, you might be familiar with him and his New Thought movement, or he was part of the sort of early 20th century, late 19th, early 20th century American spiritual movement known as New Thought, which is where all of that sort of law of attraction, law of assumption, the secret, manifestation, all that sort of stuff came from. Neville Goddard was probably the most refined voice in that milieu, as the French would say. And he gave, I don't even know, a few thousand lectures in the 30s and 40s about, picking the reality you want to live in, sort of a thing. And it's where the so-called law of assumption comes from that a lot of the New Agers like to talk about. And it's funny, none of them ever give credit to Neville Goddard. They all have their YouTube videos and pretend like they freaking thought of it. But anyway, he described how it's best to do the sort of affirmations of the reality you want to live in during hypnagogiac states. That it's in the hypnagogiac state that you can most powerfully alter the reality in which you live and pick the, people have all sorts of words for it these days, the timeline or the parallel world or the quantum displaced field, all the silly words that people come up with these days of picking your own reality and living in that one instead of the one that you dislike, picking one that's your preference. And he said it works best, and people attest to it. When you make those affirmations and things during the hypnagogiac state, usually just before sleeping at bedtime and right when you wake up, if you can get in the habit of remembering as soon as you wake up to like reaffirm your desires or whatever it is you're trying to do. So you can alter your perceptions, you can perhaps even alter your reality, and you can gain some power during the hypnagogiac state, or this liminal state between waking and sleeping. Now, if you're not in control of yourself, if you lack self-control, if you lack emotional control, if you lack mental acuity, if you lack intelligence, I would not recommend messing around with hypnagogiac states, because the hypnagogiac state is also the hypnotized state, or the mesmerized state. And now, I know a lot of hypnotherapists who will say self-hypnotism is a good thing, but again, under very special circumstances, because in that hypnagogiac state you become very, very malleable, essentially vulnerable. And you can implant suggestions into yourself that you might not necessarily want, that will then begin to unfold in your reality. You can accidentally implant, emotional or psychological disorders. You can change something in your life that probably was best left unchanged. But usually when you do it yourself, these problems don't happen. I'm not trying to scare you away from trying this stuff, because when you do it to yourself, the likelihood of something going wrong is very, very slim. You just need to have some intelligence, and you just need to think carefully and feel fully what it is you're doing, use your intuition, and just, don't be like a greedy, stupid jackass about it, and you'll probably be fine. It's when other people do it to you is when the trouble comes in. Of course, William James talked about subliminal communion, where in a hypnotized state, a person can pass on their beliefs into the hypnotized person, even if they don't mean to, because it's subliminal. I don't have to say things to you if you're hypnotized. I can essentially telepathically, for lack of a better word, implant things into you when you're in a hypnagogiac state. I don't even have to say or do anything. I just have to kind of think it or even just feel it, and you'll soak it up like a sponge, and it might become part of your belief system, worldview, ideology, etc. In fact, this is how the intelligence agencies brainwash people. Of course, the famous MK Ultra program of the CIA, where they force people into liminal states, either using hallucinogenic drugs like LSD, hypnotism, trauma and torture, all sorts of different techniques to force someone into a liminal state between two stable personalities, or just one stable personality that's been split in two, creating a liminal state in the middle. That's what happens when you take a drug. You have the state you were in before you took the drug, and you have the state you'll be in when the drug wears off. Those are two stable personalities. And then the state where you're under the influence of the drug is the liminal state between those two. And there are reports from the intelligence agencies that say we can alter people's memories, we can erase people's memories, we can implant memories, we can completely alter someone's personality, and we can get them to do things that they normally would never do. And this is all because they prolong a liminal state. Most liminal states are very, very, very brief. Very brief, sometimes only seconds. A shaman will prolong the liminal state to maybe 15 minutes, possibly a few hours, depending on what they're doing. And that's extreme. 15 minutes in a liminal state is extreme as it is. But then, of course, you take a hallucinogenic drug, and that can be prolonged between 4 and 15 hours, depending on the dosage. And the liminal state becomes very prolonged, and your mind, your life is very, very malleable during that time. So, there's the examples of volunteers from the intelligence agencies, people who are kidnapped by the intelligence agencies or even raised by them from childhood. Yeah, sure, we have those stories and those people who are raised to be Manchurian candidates or whatever. But we also have it happening by and large in society. For instance, if you've ever noticed, on the mainstream news media, I think all of them do this, whether it's the BBC, Fox, CNN, MSNBC, what have you, all of them do this, where they have like a countdown before the 6 o'clock news. It's like 5:59 and 45 seconds, right? And they have that 15-second countdown, so you're seeing like 15, 14, 13 off in the corner somewhere. There's lots of swirling circles. Maybe the earth is spinning, and then a couple pictures of circles or C shapes that are twirling around. And it's like, wow, looks like you're in a freaking hypnotist's office with the stopwatch and the counting backwards and the circles and the pendulums. It's like the news is putting you in a hypnagogiac state right before it comes on. It puts you in this relaxed, ready to be suggestible and malleable state. And then they pump you with the propaganda and the brainwashing and all that sort of thing. And you become way more suggestible because you've been relaxed with a countdown, with circular moving shapes, and some pleasant music that's slightly dramatic. It's like both pleasing and dramatic, so it relaxes you, but also makes you aware and grabs your attention simultaneously. And I'm a music producer. I know for a fact that they hire music producers and psychologists to work together to actually compose and engineer this type of music. I've been in music studios that have done this for news agencies. So don't call me a conspiracy theorist. This is a fact. They work with psychologists to make hypnotic music that simultaneously relaxes you and grabs your attention. It puts you in an extremely malleable, suggestible state. So I would recommend never watching the mainstream news if you just want my opinion. Just don't watch it. It's poison. It's garbage. And it's going to brainwash you. And it's the same techniques that mesmerists and hypnotists use, and just avoid it. Because you can see today's news media, I mean, most of them are intelligence assets. They don't even hide it. It's right there on their Wikipedia pages, like Anderson Cooper and all these, George Stephanopoulos. These people work for intelligence agencies. They brag about it to their friends. It's on their Wikipedia pages that they're CIA assets and stuff like that. So you have the CIA who does MK Ultra programs, and then you have CIA assets on the news who are talking to you after you've just been hypnotized essentially by their intro sequence. You know, it's like, just put two and two together here. I'm not trying to freak you out. I'm just trying to just look for these things. You know, I'm helping you out to have sovereignty over your own consciousness. And this is one of the main ways in which they do this. The way telephone apps or smartphone apps are set up to scroll upward. Again, the upward motion, it forces your eyes to flit up as you're scrolling. And the upward flitting, if you've ever seen someone in a trance state, their eyes roll back into their head because it, just the act of doing that kind of closes this sort of electrical circuit. It's more of an etheric circuit, if you know about qigong, or ether and the energy channels of the body. Looking upward sort of connects this little circuit between the part of your mind that perceives things and the part of your higher mind that is more in tune with reality. You know, what people call the third eye, right? So it's a way of like activating your third eye in a sense. And if you activate your third eye while you're ingesting essentially mental garbage, it's going to alter your reality. You use your third eye for that sort of Neville Goddard law of assumption stuff in the hypnagogiac state. Like the third eye is what connects your consciousness to the spiritual realm, and the spiritual realm is where your reality is kind of created. So if you get into that creational space, connecting to your third eye, you're more in that spiritual creative space where you can actually alter the reality in which you live. And then you're going to alter it with the garbage that's on social media. That's what's going to start coming through into your life, into your belief system, into your ideology, into your emotions. You're flitting your eyes up and down as you're scrolling is making you more suggestible to the emotional pollution and mental pollution that's coming through your phone. And you don't want to do that. You're going to get swept up by this group or this ideology or that ideology. It's going to become your ideology, and you're not even going to know why. Things are going to start making you angry, and you don't know why. You're going to start getting triggered by this person or annoyed by that group or what have you. And, you know, I don't think you want to be like that. I don't want to be like that. I want to have sovereignty over my emotions and how I react to things. I want to have freedom, internal freedom. And this brings me to the idea that there is a part of you that is absolutely rooted in reality, the fundamental, purest reality. It's where we're all from. It's where this world came from. It's where all things, all phenomenon come from, all consciousness comes from, that fundamental reality. Some call it God, some call it the source, some call it Tao, some call it Shiva, some call it the unified field. Whatever. I don't care what you call it. The point is that reality came from somewhere, right? everything came from somewhere. And that source is connected to us on a very deep level. We're connected to it. And on a very, very deep level, we are aware of it. It's like the old Buddhist saying that you're already enlightened, you just forgot. Or you're already enlightened, it's just been occluded or hidden from you over layers and layers of conditioning. It's like a mirror that's caked with dust, and you just have to like blow the piles of dust off until you find the bright shiny mirror underneath it. And it's like, oh, the mirror already existed. You didn't have to become enlightened, you already were, because there's a part of you already connected to the deepest source of reality. There's a part of you that's already aware of the deepest, truest reality. And it's just been occluded. You know, Christians say we're in this fallen state, right, of ignorance. A lot of occultists say the same thing, that we are in a very material state that is far away from the spiritual world. And so, in this state of relative ignorance, again, it's not real ignorance, but of relative ignorance, you have essentially two choices. And to a lot of people, they don't see the choice. You can recognize the occlusion, the obscuration between you and truth, between you and reality. You can notice, I don't know anything. I have to do something about this. I am ignorant. I'm so ignorant. I don't know what a human being is. I don't know what my own consciousness is. I don't know what this world is. I am ignorant. You make that declaration, not a declaration. You acknowledge the issue, let's put it that way. And then you seek ways and means and methodologies of how to live in the truth, how to get rid of the occlusion, blow the dust off the mirror, and live, act, think, will, and feel from reality. Try to get to that deep part of yourself that is aware of reality. The second option is to not give a damn about any of that and just live by whatever this occluded, ignorant part of you wants. You claim that part of you is yourself. You don't even look for that deeper part of yourself that's connected to the truth. You don't care about it. You don't seek it. You don't know it exists. You don't want to know it exists. It doesn't matter. You just live from what the Freudians and New Agers would call the ego. And you just do what the ego wants, and you just don't care about the deeper questions of life. And when you do this, you'll believe different ideologies. You'll believe different religions, or lack of religion. You'll believe in certain political movements, or you'll believe in this, that, the other. You'll be swept up by all these different ideologies, and you'll look for meaning and truth in these different ideologies and these different movements and science and religion and this, that, the other. And you're much more susceptible to manipulation because you're not rooted in reality. This is a liminal state as well that we are in. We are between two states again, and it kind of is like the drug use example I used before, where the two states are between are kind of the same state. You have the state where before the universe was created, let's say, if there was a before, it's difficult to use like 3D language to describe these things, but you know, the state before the fall or before creation, when we were utterly aware of all the truth of the source of reality. Then there's the fall into creation or matter or living in this dream world in samsara, whatever you want to call it, which is the liminal state between being enlightened again or remembering your enlightenment and reconnecting to that awareness. So full awareness, the fall into matter, back to full awareness. So you're between the two states of full awareness, the before full awareness and the after full awareness, and which are really the same state. So to say it's between two states is a bit, again, it's difficult to use this kind of language because these are essentially transcendent concepts, and you can't really use language to describe things that are higher than language. Anyway, that's another thought experiment. So being a human being in the material world, is a liminal state. And everything's in flux, and everything's constantly changing. And but it's a relatively stable liminal state. I know that's a bit of a contradiction in terms, but it's not like, you know, things don't change too quickly. If I want to go to the grocery store, there's a series of things I got to do that are relatively stable. I put on my shoes, I walk to my car, I drive my car. And it's not like crazy change all the time. It's not like I'm teleporting to the grocery store or anything, or it's not like dragons are coming out of the road and the road is turning into marshmallows and then back into a road and then the tree turns into a tentacle. It's not like that liminal. So because our human life is relatively stable, it doesn't feel like a liminal state, and we have some sovereignty over our mind. But the problem is that we don't have that much. We don't have as much as we could have through self-awareness training. And to ensure that you experience freedom and sovereignty, you must become self-aware. To the extent that you are not self-aware is the extent to which you can be manipulated. The extent that you are self-aware is the extent that you cannot be manipulated. To the extent that you are self-aware is the extent that you are free. Free from a lot of the laws that govern this world. Not just the laws of the government, but like, we live in a world that has lots and lots of laws. Gravity, physics, whatever. All the different laws that we are subject to. And when you are kind of between, this being rooted in fundamental reality or believing in ideologies that may or may not even be your own, it's best to not get swept up in ideologies, but it's hard to realize that it's happening to you. Like, how do you know when you're being exploited in a liminal state? And it can be very, very difficult, and I'm honestly not 100% sure how, because everybody reports something different. Like, for instance, I don't know if I was just fortunate or if I had like good karma from a past life, if such things exist, but I got into spirituality and occultism and stuff when I was like 4 years old, like 4 or 5 years old. And I was pretty suggestible in my early teenage years. I was like a leftist and crap like that. Was it Mark Twain that says, like, if you're not a socialist at 14, you got no heart, or something like that. And if you're not a capitalist by age 30, you got no brains. I think it was Mark Twain. But anyway, so like, yeah, teenagers are pretty susceptible to propaganda and ideology and stuff. And like, socialism sounded nice to me because I liked sharing and I hated poverty. And so when you're a teenager, these ideas sound good to you. But I was fortunate enough to have already been on the spiritual occult path of self-awareness training from a very young age, and it only lasted a few years for me. By the time I was 18, 19, I just realized, like, I'm being swept up in a lot of nonsense. These are not my own beliefs. These beliefs and thoughts were implanted in my mind by other people, and I need to purify myself from that influence. Some people don't get into spirituality until they're in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. And it usually comes through what someone might call grace, the grace of God, where something just happens to them that's sort of I don't want to say explosive. Like a sudden shift in mentality. Something happens that like snaps them up, like getting splashed with cold water while you're sleeping, and you're like, whoa, I've been seeing things all wrong. And like, just some event will occur in their life that sort of snaps them out of something. Maybe it's a near-death experience. God forbid that should happen to any of you. But I hear near-death experiences have a way of snapping people out of their nonsense. Meeting someone, what, the Church of the Subgenius would call a short-duration personal savior. We all have a few of those in our lives, where someone will come into our life and just like drop some truth bombs on you and then leave. And it's like, what just happened? And then your perspective is totally changed because of something that somebody had said to you. Or it could be anything, some sudden event that just that forces a radical change upon you. And the way I hear it, that's how it mostly happens in today's world. Most people aren't like me. Unfortunately, more people should be like me. That's not what I mean. I meant I had an easy time of it because I was into occultism and spirituality from such a young age that I was essentially immune to propaganda for my entire life, and I never fell for any of the bullshit. Like, for instance, when I was 11 years old, I didn't believe for a second anything the government was telling me about certain events that had just happened in my backyard. You know what I'm saying? Like, a bunch of towers fall down, and they're going to blame like a bunch of like cave-dwelling Afghanis. And it's like, no. 2 airplanes can't destroy 3 skyscrapers. Sorry, pal, you're not going to fool me. And everybody else like plummeted to sleep. Everybody else was hypnotized by this event. And I'm the only one like, are you all like stupid or something? I don't understand how you all could have fallen for this trick. I just never fell for it. And now here we are like 22 years later, and people are like, oh man, did you know 9/11 was like a conspiracy? It was an inside job. It's like, yeah, I told you that 22 years ago and you yelled at me for it. And now everyone's like, no, no one knew until now. And it's like, dude, forget you. So like, there aren't that many people who are as immune to propaganda until they have a radical shift, a radical wake-up call. And I don't know how to manufacture wake-up calls for people. I don't know how these things happen. I guess it's like not really up to us. It's like a grace thing. It's like God decides when to wake up his sleepwalking children, I guess. And I've found over the course of my life that like you can't wake people up. It's not a thing. It's not a thing that you can do unless you're some extraordinarily talented like avatar or something, or you have some insane psychological trick. But, you know, it's easier to put people to sleep and to get them to believe in lies than it is to wake them up and get them to understand the truth. And it's because they're in a liminal state, which is a dreamlike state. It's not a state that feels awake. And they don't know that they don't feel awake because they've never felt awakened before. It's like when you're dreaming. And it seems so real. I'm sure many of you have had these dreams where you're dreaming and you think it's real. It just feels like normal life. And then you wake up and you're like, oh, that was a dream. That wasn't real at all. Wow, what a trip. That's how a lot of people are in today's world. They believe absolute falsehoods. They believe things that are entirely contradictory to the truth. And they just believe them because they don't know what it feels like, because they don't know what the actual truth feels like. They don't know what it feels like to possess the truth, to be awake. They're fine with their dream state, with the fantasy and the delusion that they live in, because it feels real to them, because they have no frame of reference. They have no actual reality to compare it to, which is why the sudden events that awaken people are always like, you know, people recount them as mystical experiences and spiritual experiences that are so radically different, and they mention it was like waking up from a dream. I've never really experienced that, so I can't speak to that phenomenon, although I know plenty of people who have relayed stories like that to me. And of course I've read many accounts of it and so on. But it's weird living in a world of sleepwalkers and liminality, and people in states of liminality, constant liminality, when you've essentially been awake your whole life. That's a bizarre thing, and that has been very difficult for me, growing up and just like never feeling quite like a child, always feeling like an adult. And even when you're an adult, you feel like an even older adult, and all the other adults are still children, kind of a feeling, and it's very depressing. And I know it probably sounds very arrogant, like, oh, I'm smarter than everybody else. But that's not exactly what I mean. This is a real lived reality for people like me, where we just don't understand how people can be so hoodwinked, so duped all the time. And they just don't want to know the truth. They just don't want to. You can tell it to them, you can prove it to them, and it doesn't matter, because they are in a hypnotic state. They are not founded in reality. Because there's a part of themselves that is founded in reality, like I was saying before. There is a fundamental part of us that is rooted in the fundamental reality. And everybody is there. Everybody has that fundamental awareness, but most people, well, I don't know if it's most, that's a pessimistic way of saying it. Many people have occluded that. It's been obscured, occluded, hidden from them. They don't feel connected to that fundamental awareness. It's not, they're, practically speaking, they're not connected to it, although they are. But they're utterly unaware that there's even a deeper truth or a deeper reality here. But they are connected to it. And that's the liminal phase that they're in. Because because that deep part of you is called intuition. The deep part of you that's connected to the ultimate reality and informs your ideas and your perceptions, that's what we call intuition. And so if you have an intuition about something, and then somebody tries to gaslight you, or some counterintelligence officer is trying to lie to you about something, you feel there's something truthful in something you just experienced, and then someone's trying to gaslight you and tell you, no, that's not what it's like, that's not what happened, that's not the truth of this. Here's the actual truth, and they're lying to you. They're trying to get you to believe a falsehood. Your intuition is like, no, this is a falsehood, what this guy's saying. But everybody's saying it. The professor at school is saying it. You know, my sibling is saying it, or my parents are saying it, or the TV is saying it, the news media is saying it, the government is saying it, the scientist is saying it, the priest is saying it, the social media is saying it, all my friends are saying it. So it must be true because all these different people and all these different sources are saying it. So that's true. But your intuition is telling you, no, it's not. Your intuition knows what the truth is. And then you kind of just ignore your intuition and you subdue it and you suppress it. You tell yourself your intuition is incorrect because the whole world is telling me my intuition is incorrect. The whole world is gaslighting me, so it's probably not gaslighting. They're probably being helpful. And it's my intuition which is flawed here. And this is what you start to believe. And then if you do that enough, you will stop feeling your intuition. That your higher self, that part of you that's connected to the source of reality, the fundamental reality, will be covered up and essentially will give up. It's not that it gave up, but it's that you've decided to cover it up and suppress it so much that you no longer feel it. And you essentially no longer have an intuition. Now the liminal stage is in a dangerous place. You don't even remember the stable state. You are now essentially operating only in a liminal state, and you don't recognize it as liminal. You recognize it as stable, because the stable state has been occluded and hidden from you. So now you are mistaking a liminal state for a stable state. And when you become stable, or feel that you are stable in a liminal state, you can be pushed into an even further liminal state. Now you can take a liminal state, that's between two other liminal states, because you think those liminal states are stable. You see what I'm saying? You perceive that the liminal state you're in is stable, which then unlocks another layer of liminality. And this is just entering the freaking matrix now. You're going to be living in complete illusion and delusion. And this, unfortunately, has happened to many people, particularly in Western civilization. The liminal state that they were in became stable in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. And that liminal state we'll call, I don't really want to get biased in politics here, or partisan or whatever, but I think it's safe to say the left is the most delusional we've ever seen in probably recorded human history. They believe utter fairy tales and falsehoods, because the 60s came and there's a lot of leftist ideology being spread through colleges and universities. Then the 70s came and spread further. It became normal in the media and in movies and in music. And then the 80s came and it was just utterly galvanized. It became like pedagogy. We are now teaching leftism in colleges, and this is the correct way to teach students. It became totally galvanized in the 80s. In the 90s, it then was taught to the next generation, and now that generation are adults in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, and 50s. So a liminal state became stable, and now they're being pushed into a further liminal state with these delusional beliefs. Because original leftism is like a political and economic ideology from the 60s to the 80s. It was like, we should talk about economic programs for poverty, and we should talk about fairness in the courts, and these things that like a sane person could agree with, of course. There's nothing that insane about the old left. It was fine. Some of their ideas needed to be taken into account to make things more fair and prosperous for our country. But it just kept getting taken too far, because there were certain subversive agents who were pushing it further and further left than it needed to go, just to subvert Western civilization, because these were enemies of the West and stuff like that. I mean, you can look up the history of the Cold War and the infiltration of universities and all that. That's neither here nor there. But it is. It's related because we're pushed further and further into a dissociated state where the things they start to believe in don't line up with reality. You know? This is going to be controversial, but I think it's important that I just say it anyway, and I don't care. Like, I might get into trouble. I don't think my channel's big enough for me to get into trouble, but, you know, like the feminist movement, for instance, they made some sense in the 50s, but by the 60s, they stopped making sense. Like, the early suffragettes and stuff, it was like, take us seriously, let us pursue our hobbies, let us enter the workforce if we want to be in the workforce, let us just kind of do what we want. And it's like, yeah, okay, cool, that's fine. No problem with that kind of feminism, just to be taken seriously. Of course we'll take women seriously. Like, yeah, these are fair demands. Sure, no problem. And then by the 60s, it was like, you know, borderline, let's cut the penises off of little boys. But now, today, that's what they actually do. In the 60s, they joked about it. Today, they actually do it. You know what I mean? It like became rabid. It's not pro-women anymore. It's anti-man. Because they got all the pro-women stuff by the 1930s, 1940s. All the pro-women stuff was achieved politically and economically. They had no other dragons to slay. And the movement was going to die, as it did in most other countries in the East, where women were taken more seriously, and then the feminist movement just kind of lost steam because they were satisfied with what they had achieved. But in the West, there were intelligence agents and saboteurs and cults who were like, no, don't let this feminist movement die. Keep it going, right? Hypnotizing people more and more to keep teaching further and further things that women should be like. Make them delusional. Give them this false sense of self-worth. Make them think they're like the queens of the freaking universe. Make them think that men are trash and evil and things like that. Just push them over the freaking edge. And it's because they were in a liminal state that they were so suggestible to doing that. And it manipulated their minds and their emotions. And now, look at Western women, for example. Not all Western women, but the leftist feminist type of woman. And even it's even gotten so bad that like so-called normal women, or women that are closer to the center politically, sometimes get caught up in this nonsense and this man-hating nonsense. And they believe things that aren't true about men, about money, about how men are and how men should be, about what women are and what women should be. They believe things that are just patently untrue, that are obviously untrue. And I won't get into the list of them. And they're fine with it. They can't be snapped out of it because they're in a liminal state. They're in a dreamlike hypnagogiac state, and their minds are malleable. And this got taken even further in recent years with the rainbow flag people. And I've got nothing against self-expression and the freedom to express yourself and do what you want. I'm not going to stop someone from being who they are and doing what they want. I have no problem with these people. What I have a problem with is their lack of self-awareness makes them vulnerable. In any given society, it was like traditionally throughout the last like few thousand years, the only transgendered people who existed were like shamans, certain types of priests who were doing what I was saying before, the taboo things to gain a liminal access to the spirit world. And like that was why people did like horrible things like self-castration and stuff like that to create a liminal state in themselves that was more permanent, that was essentially permanent. And they could then officially act as a shaman 24/7 instead of like 5 minutes here, an hour there. It like became a career for people. And this is why there were like eunuchs in political courts and stuff, because they were like shamans. This was why certain cults of like Cybele and Rome and the Sibyls would castrate boys to turn them into like essentially women that would be more sensitive to oracular phenomena, the trans-channeling phenomena, because generally only women can be trans-channelers. You have to be a very feminine man in order to be a trans-channeler. So to manufacture oracles, they would castrate boys. And they would force prolonged liminal states on people, putting them between genders. They were not quite boys, they were not quite girls, they were between the two, which then allows for more paranormal and occult phenomena to occur around that person. When you have a liminal person, it goes back to the MK Ultra program, that person becomes malleable. You can implant ideas, ideologies, behaviors, alter memories, erase memories, implant memories. You can shape a person like clay if you put them in a hypnagogiac liminal state. And putting people in a transgendered state, making it trendy, encouraging people to do it. I've read a study that up to 20% of Gen Z is transgendered, or some people believe that 20% of them is transgendered. That's ridiculous, because the percentage should be less than 0.001% of any given generation. Naturally and traditionally, that's how it's been. And I have no problem with authentic transgendered people who do it for their own personal reasons. Do what you want. I'm not criticizing or trying to demean you or anything. But these numbers are absurd. This is not normal. That this is just suddenly happening. And it's being put in the media. They put, if you believe the Alex Jones stuff, they're putting stuff in the water that's turning the freaking frogs gay. Like, imagine if that stuff is true, what it could be doing to a human, and the generation of people who consume food laced with these drugs, women who flush their birth control down the toilet and it becomes part of the water supply that you're all drinking. So men are now drinking like estrogen injections in their tap water because it's really difficult to filter out of the water system. All that sort of stuff is going on. And it's like, I think some of it is going on purposefully, obviously, like the stuff in the movies and the media and pushing it in schools, pushing it in grade schools. People who haven't even hit puberty yet are being introduced to these ideas. It's like they don't even know what any of this stuff is. Their balls haven't even dropped. They haven't had their first periods yet, and you're talking about this stuff? That's utterly inappropriate. That's mind control. That's brainwashing. And you're encouraging people to put themselves in liminal states between genders, between sexualities, between sexual identities, even people who are like furries or whatever, between the identities of human beings and animals. It's like the shamans who wear animal masks in order to become somebody else. And so it seems like someone behind the scenes is forcing people into liminal states or encouraging people to put themselves into liminal states, which makes you malleable and suggestible, and a very prolonged liminal state. Identity becomes a part of you. It's not just a liminal state that lasts 15 minutes. If you declare yourself transgendered, that could last the rest of your life. It's not a 15-minute liminal state to do a miracle healing. This is a prolonged, years, decades-long liminal state that you are now in. And you will be extraordinarily more suggestible than someone who's in a stable state that has one gender and sticks to it. So if 20% of a population or more, just by being exposed to these ideas, start to think of, oh, gender is fluid, this is fluid, that's fluid, between this and that is fluid, all these things are malleable and fluid, you become liminal. You get put into a liminal phase, and you become malleable and suggestible. And it goes back to Neville Goddard, where you can alter your reality when you're in a liminal phase. So if you were like the Illuminati, and you put the whole of society into a liminal phase, you have tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people, even billions of people, in a liminal state, all together, all at the same time for a prolonged period, and then you begin implanting ideologies and beliefs into these suggestible, hypnotized, liminal people, and then now, because they're in the liminal state, there's much more potency to that suggestion, and it has much more likelihood to become an actual physical reality. You see, as per the law of assumption of Neville Goddard and all the New Thought people, when you're in a liminal state, you make suggestions and affirmations to yourself, and then it becomes your reality in a real physical sense. So if you have all these things that are suggesting to you, the TV, the movies, the social media, the news, this, that, and the other, while you're in a prolonged liminal state, these people behind the scenes, these Illuminati type people, are using the population as like manifestation batteries. They are trying to manifest a particular world for themselves. They're trying to get you to believe certain things in a liminal state so that it has much greater likelihood of becoming a reality. This is obviously extremely bizarre, and it's essentially what people call sorcery and witchcraft when it's used in a negative way. But a liminal state can also be used in a positive way, as per Neville Goddard and his law of assumption and the manifesting your desired life. You can use it in a positive way that's beneficial to yourself if you're aware of it. If you have self-awareness, self-sovereignty, sovereignty over your own mind, sovereignty over your own emotions, you can tell the difference between your own original thought and a thought that was put there by someone else. Then you can use a liminal state to your advantage and create a truly better world, not only for yourself, but for others as well. If you lack self-awareness, if you lack mental acuity, you lack emotional control and emotional awareness, then that prolonged liminal state that everybody is in, or that a large number of people are in, it's going to be used against all of us. It's going to be used to enslave all of us, because those are the patterns I see. Maybe I'm pessimistic and negative, but those are the patterns I see. The World Economic Forum, the central bank digital currencies, the censoring of people who are anywhere to the right of socialist on social media and the internet, the hatred against men, particularly the hatred against white men, all this stuff going on. It seems like they're trying to make a pretty terrible world. A pretty terrible world. Because chaos is a ladder. It's a ladder to power. And if you create chaos, then you can become an opportunist, find ways of gaining power for yourself. In a stable society, there are not that many ladders to political power. There are fewer ladders in a stable society. So opportunists who want more political power, who want to take political power away from certain people and give it to themselves, love chaos. And if they understand Neville Goddard and the liminal states that I've been describing, how you can literally alter reality very effectively from liminal states, from making suggestions in liminal states, then they could potentially alter the entire world. They can alter the reality itself just by hypnotizing people and putting them in prolonged liminal states. So I just want everybody to be aware of this sort of thing. That was the reason I made this video. I know it's kind of long-winded. I don't know how long this has been going. Quite a while, I'm sure. And I just feel this is one of the most important things a person can realize in today's world, is recognize what is a thought being put in your head by somebody else versus your own independent free thought. And you can gain that discernment through self-awareness training. Just remembering yourself, going within yourself, looking for the origins of your emotions, the origins of your thoughts, just being with yourself, meditating as it were, self-observing, just collecting observations of yourself. You don't even necessarily have to regulate what you're doing. You just notice why you feel a certain way, why you think a certain way, when something happens and you're triggered, notice that you're triggered. Just remember yourself. Just notice that you're feeling an emotion. Notice that you're stirring your pasta when you're cooking it. Just remember, oh, I'm here, I'm stirring. Just constantly remember yourself. Oh, I suddenly felt a bit of an elation. Why did I feel a little bit of happiness? You don't even have to ask why at first. Just notice that you did. And just remember, oh, I'm feeling it right now. Oh, I'm feeling this emotion. Oh, I just had that thought. Don't fight it. Don't struggle against it or anything. Just notice it. And the more you practice this, the more self-aware you become. And then you automatically start doing something about it. You don't even have to try. It just, the more you become self-observant and self-aware, you automatically begin regulating the negative things about you that you don't need, and you don't even have to struggle against it. So just collect observations. And then you become more sovereign in your mind, in your consciousness, in your body, in your being, in your health, in your soul. And that's all I wanted to arm you with today. Just a little bit of, look out for prolonged enforced liminal states. Look out when people are trying to force you between two states. Because when you're forced between two states, they're probably going to try to implant a suggestion in your head and alter reality as they want it to be altered, and not as it should be for you. So just remember yourself. Thank you very much for watching. I hope this was useful and helpful. I hope you're a little bit more optimistic about things going on now. That, yeah, just don't be bothered too much by what's going on in the world. Just be yourself. Just be yourself. Thanks a lot. Have a good one. See you next time.